We now come to the urgent question. Dame Priti Patel.
To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Development Affairs if he'll provide an update on the negotiations between His Majesty's Government and the Government of Mauritius over the future sovereignty of the British Indian Ocean Territory.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question. We welcome yesterday's reiteration, Mr. Speaker, by Prime Minister Ramgoolam of his willingness to conclude a deal with the UK. We are confident that the agreement is in both sides' shared interests, and we will continue working with the new Mauritian Government to finalise the deal. Prime Minister Ramgoolam's comments follow his commitment to completing the negotiations following his election in an exchange of letters with the Prime Minister. And as part of the usual government-to-government engagement, the Prime Minister's Buyout envoy, Jonathan Powell, met with PM Ramgoolam in late November to start that process. And this was followed last week, Mr. Speaker, by a visit to Mauritius by the UK's chief negotiator, Harriet Matthews, and other officials for the talks. These talks were productive, and it's now completely understandable that the new Mauritian government will want time to study the details. It would not be appropriate, Mr. Speaker, or usual for me to give a running commentary on what was discussed during routine and private engagements, nor indeed on any potential future engagements. However, I am confident that we have agreed a good and fair deal that is in both sides' interests. It protects the base at proportionate cost. It has been supported across the national security architecture in the United States and by India for those very reasons. There will be clear commitments, as I've said a number of times in this House, Mr. Speaker, in the treaty for robust security arrangements, including preventing the presence of foreign security forces on the outer islands, ensuring that the base can continue to operate securely and effectively. The agreement is subject to finalising a treaty, and following signature, the Government will bring forward a bill to enable implementation of that treaty, and both Houses of Parliament will also have the opportunity to scrutinise that treaty before ratification.
Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. And once again, ministers have been reluctantly dragged to the House, and I've just seen the Foreign Secretary leg it from the House, in fact. In a world of increasing danger and change and uncertainty, why are they so keen to surrender this strategic asset? We've been told, Mr. Speaker, repeatedly by ministers that this is a good deal, that it has the support of the national security apparatus. We keep hearing this. Where is the evidence to justify these hollow complaints? And if the deal is so good, why has the government been so secretive about the details? Indeed. So can the minister explain? I'm just so sorry the Foreign Secretary has just abandoned the House and not even come here, because yet again we are responding to media reports. Will the minister be able to extend the lease on the military base after 99 years, as reported? Will we and the US still have full autonomy of operation? What safeguards will be in place to stop other countries, including China, from potentially trying to establish themselves on the base or near the military base on Diego Garcia? How much is the British taxpayer going to be liable for each year? And in total over 99 years? Now that we know we'll be paying for the privilege of giving away these islands, what exactly is our money going to be paying for? And the government claims it cannot disclose this information about the lease, but he can at least surely say and explain and be honest, where on earth is this budget coming from? If it's accounted for in the budget forecast presented in the autumn, and we've all heard about those budget forecasts recently, tell us what the funding is going to be for the economic partnership and the trust fund for Chagossian people. Can the minister also tell us what aspects of this deal the new Mauritian government want reconsidering in the response? What consideration is being given to provide more funding or to weaken any protections that may be in this lease? And can he explain, Mr. Speaker, importantly, why has it been the views of the Chagossian community have been so ignored? And, Mr. Speaker, when the whole world can see that this proposed deal was falling apart, the Foreign Secretary and this government have tried to flog it constantly. Not only is this monumental failure of statecraft from this Labour government, it is also a significant humiliation for the Foreign Secretary and his credibility and the Prime Minister. And why are Labour putting the security at risk, ignoring Chagossians and letting our stand-in go into freefall in this world?
Just to remind people, it is 2 minutes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're absolutely not damaging our security. We're protecting it through this deal. And that is why this deal has been agreed to protect the operation of that base, to protect it against the legal uncertainty, and to ensure that it is on a safe footing well into the next century. Now, Mr. Speaker, she constantly refers to somehow as giving up the base on Diego Garcia. This is exactly the opposite. It protects the base on Diego Garcia. It protects the base to continue operating.
Mr. Gaddy, we had enough all the way through PMQs. If I hear any more, you're out, and I seriously mean that. I'm constantly not putting up with it. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she constantly refers as if somehow we're giving up the base on Diego Garcia. That is the exact opposite of what this deal does. Unlike the failure to secure that deal under the previous administration, which I might remind the House, Mr. Speaker, went through 11 rounds of negotiations and failed to secure a deal to protect our base. So it protects the base. Mr. Speaker, she asked a series of other questions. She asked me, would we be able to extend the lease? The answer is yes. Would we continue to have the autonomy of our operations for those in our allies? Absolutely yes. Are there safeguards in place to prevent foreign forces or others on the outer islands? Absolutely yes. I have answered the questions on costs a number of times in the House. We are very clear that it is not normal practice for the United Kingdom to confirm the value of its payments for military bases anywhere across the globe. We have not done, Mr. Speaker, in the case of any other base, for example that in Oman, and the United States itself has not confirmed the value of its direct payments for bases, including in Djibouti and the Marshall Islands. She spoke about the Chagossians. I am confident, having engaged with Chagossian communities over many years, that this deal has clear benefits for Chagossian communities. It will allow resettlement of the outer islands. It will allow the restart of visits. There is the trust fund that she mentioned herself. And it's only clear, Mr. Speaker, she referred to media reports. There is a huge amount of speculation. Let's get back to the actual facts on this, Mr. Speaker, which is that Mauritius, the Prime Minister has confirmed himself in Mauritius to his Assembly that he is willing to conclude this deal with the United Kingdom. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker, and we will protect our national security and our interests.
Peter Lund.
Okay. Under the Mauritian Criminal Code, someone who questions the integrity of Mauritian territories, including the Chagos Archipelago, is subject to potentially 10 years of imprisonment. Most British Chagossians have at one time or another effectively given that level of disconsideration to the Mauritian government. What conversations have taken place by the Minister with the Mauritian government to ensure that this code will be removed so that it is possible for British Chagossians to visit Chagos in the event that this deal goes through?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, we take the interests of Chagossian communities incredibly seriously. The deal provides for Chagossians to return to the outer islands and be able to resettle if Mauritius decides to pursue a programme of resettlement. Most importantly, we're going to get on with getting those visits going so that they can go back and visit islands, including Diego Garcia, with the appropriate protections in place.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Calum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary told this House on the 7th of October that his deal was in the UK's security interest. Yet the chaos we have seen since then does nothing to assure our allies nor repel our enemies. In retrospect, does the Minister think it was wise to announce an agreement just weeks before elections in Mauritius and in the US? And does he agree it would be wise for any future agreement to come before this House for scrutiny and a vote before signature? It's important that any agreement complies with the opinion of the ICJ, but self-determination remains an important principle too. So now that the negotiations have reopened, can the Minister say how the Chagossian people will be represented in those talks? And the court ruled this week that Tamil asylum seekers were illegally detained on Diego Garcia in terrible conditions. Will the Minister apologise for their treatment and assure the House that the camp in which they were held is now closed for good?
Well, Mr. Speaker, on his first questions about the Chagossians, as I've said repeatedly in this House, their interests have been absolutely at the heart of this deal, and I'm sure they will be confident that there are a number of provisions which will satisfy the concerns that members are raising in good faith across this House and that Chagossians have raised with me directly. This was a treaty negotiation between the United Kingdom and Mauritius. He said he's aware of the ICJ judgment. I let him read that in his own time. He asked specifically about the situation regarding the migrants. Of course, we absolutely recognise and we are carefully considering the judgment of the court this week. But let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, that government inherited a deeply troubling situation which remained unresolved under the last administration for years after the migrants' arrival on Diego Garcia. I believe that the Shadow Foreign Secretary was Home Secretary at the time that the migrants first arrived. This situation went on unresolved. We were absolutely clear that this was an unsustainable situation, and we worked at pace to resolve this situation. We will carefully consider the judgment of the court.
Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can say to the Minister, those of us who have spoken to the American military know how important a base this is. Can I just confirm with him what he said? Is that since this was announced, there's been no concern raised with the government by the American military or security services?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, as far as I'm aware, that is the case, and in fact, actually the opposite. There has been a warm welcome for this agreement from across the United States security apparatus because it puts this base and our operations and our shared operations on a secure footing into the future, which, of course, Mr. Speaker, I remind the House again, is the very reason that this government and indeed the former Foreign Secretary started this process in the first place, so we are told.
Oh, well, let's go over to James Cleverly then.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would be very grateful if the Minister were able to answer this with a simple yes or no. Did the Right Honourable Member for Holborn and St Pancras have any conversations with Philip Sands, KC, about Diego Garcia without the presence of Foreign Office or other government civil servants? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have details of all of the Prime Minister's details. I'm sure he can ask the Prime Minister that question himself.
Kelvin Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For those of us that have served for the US military, that have and retain genuine and close links with the US military, and know that this does not bring about the concern that others are trying to conflate around these issues, could I ask for the Minister's view on how this is viewed by our US military friends?
My honourable friend for that question and praise him for his service and work. And I'm very, very clear, our allies in the United States and indeed our other allies who rely on the important guarantees that this base provides are supportive of this deal. This has been supported across the security apparatus at every level, and that is absolutely crucial because we would not have signed up to a deal if it didn't protect our interests and those of our closest ally.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Can the Minister enlighten us as to the attitude of the incoming Trump administration on the deal? Does he know, or shall I ask the Honourable Member for Clacton?
Well, we very much welcome, as I've said before, Mr. Speaker, the election of President-elect Trump and indeed Vice President-elect Vance. We don't, as you know, Mr. Speaker, during the transition period, there are restrictions on what conversations can and can't go on. We are, as I've said repeatedly in this House, confident that when the full details of this deal are provided by, indeed, the US national security apparatus, that any concerns will be allayed.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Minister is a strong supporter of overseas territories, as is the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister. Despite this being documented already in this House and in Gibraltar, for example, can the Minister, to avoid any doubt or further scaremongering for the benches opposite, once again confirm that this government is completely committed to supporting the right of self-determination for the people of Gibraltar and for the Falklands?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've said it before, and I thank her for her important work on Gibraltar and indeed yours, Mr. Speaker. And I will confirm against the House, we are absolutely resolutely committed to the sovereignty and self-determination of Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands. And indeed, I enjoyed meeting with our overseas territories family at the Joint Ministerial Council just a few weeks ago.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's truly baffling that such decent ministers have allowed themselves to be bamboozled by the blob. Can the Minister confirm that this is not being rushed through in advance of the takeover of the White House by an incoming president in 1 month's time, And if, in 1 month's time, that new president says this is a terrible deal, will it be too late to change it?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, and the right honourable gentleman knows I have immense respect for him and his work in this House, and I do have to take issue with his choice of words. We have incredible officials in this government who have served governments loyally on both sides of this House. They work incredibly hard, and they work incredibly hard to defend the national security and the interests of this country. If anything, Mr. Speaker, this wasn't rushed at all. This was 11 rounds of negotiations under his former government. We got in, we got a deal done. We got a deal done that protects our national security and our interests.
Bill Brittle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assurances can the Minister provide Parliament around the scrutiny that the agreements, which will be struck in due course, receive?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and as I've said a number of times in this House, the treaty, once signed, will go through the normal procedures in the House. I confirmed in my answer to the right honourable lady that it will go through that procedure. It will have opportunity for ample scrutiny by both Houses, and legislation will be laid in due course.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister gets ahead of himself. He says the Government has moved at pace to resolve the situation. The situation is not resolved. He criticises the last Government for not securing a deal. His deal is not secured either. Last time we talked about this, we talked about the Americans not being, the President-elect not being keen on the deal, the Chagossians not being properly consulted on the deal. When is he going to come back to the House on this situation and tell us something positive about this cack-handed deal?
Minister.
Well, I've repeatedly stated a number of positive things, including the support that will be inherent in this deal for Chagossians. Mr. Speaker, the positive fact is that after 11 rounds of failed negotiations under the previous government, we achieved and have done a deal. And we are confident that that deal will be supported by our partners, and we will continue to present details of it in due course.
Steve Race.
Does the Minister agree that by confirming the legal status of the base, which was left outstanding by the previous government, it will cement our role in the Indo-Pacific and provide an important pillar in our strategy to counter Chinese influence in the area?
Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right, and despite the attempts to constantly whip up this idea about Chinese influence, this deal contains very specific precautions to prevent foreign forces. And I remind the House again, Mr. Speaker, that Mauritius was one of the only countries that didn't join the Belt and Road Initiative. Their ally is India, not China.
Sir Bernard Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is clearly wanting to dismantle legacies of empire. So why then do we think it's so important to attach the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, when in fact that link was only established when both territories were acquired by the French Empire and later acquired by the British Empire? Why don't we listen to the Chagossians themselves instead of imposing the legacy of empire on the Chagossians?
Well, I have engaged with many Chagossian groups, and he will know, as I've said multiple times, that there are a range of views across the Chagossian community, and of course he's perfectly able to look at the legal judgments himself. The fact is that this government wanted to secure the long-term operation of this base and our national security and our interests. We've engaged with our partners, and we've secured a deal, which his previous government failed to do.
Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is clear is that the current situation is clearly unsustainable. Most of the negotiations on this took place under the previous administration. It is now becoming a political football. Has he heard any other serious recommendations for the future of this island?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, I haven't, and I certainly haven't heard them from the opposite benches.
Edward Mrella.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will repeat the question asked by my honourable friend, which the Minister studiously avoided, which is that clearly this deal was not ready to be signed. So why was it announced 2 weeks before the election?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when we're looking to protect the national security of this country, we will operate at the fastest and most appropriate pace that we can. The fact is that this has been left languishing under the previous administration, with the future of the base unsecure, and we have secured it.
Jim Rocker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I wish you a Merry Christmas as well. Does the Minister recognise that again and again this issue is being raised by the opposition, but the cognitive dissonance of the fact that it was them that opened the negotiations in the first place? And I have to endorse, Mr. Speaker, the comments of my honourable friend about the scaremongering and the irresponsible way the opposition has conducted this debate with regard to other overseas territories and self-determination.
A little bit concerned, as I've granted the UQ. I've taken a judgment call. I hope we're not questioning that, Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and it's absolutely right that this House scrutinises these matters and will continue to get the opportunity to do so in a range of forums. Indeed, I'm meeting with parliamentarians later today to discuss these matters. But, Mr. Speaker, there does appear to be collective amnesia on the opposite side. I've raised it on a number of times. Many of them served as ministers in the previous government, and they knew exactly what the risks were to our national security.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just returned hot foot from a very full Mar-a-Lago. And I've spoken to several members, senior administrators especially, of the incoming administration who will be in the White House in 32 days' time. Let me assure you, there is very deep disquiet amongst all of them as to what this may mean for the long-term future of Diego Garcia and whether such deal would hold, given the precedent of the deal break over Hong Kong. They also can't understand why we would surrender the sovereignty of these islands on an advisory judgment from a pretty obscure court. But this is about sovereignty. And you keep saying yourself that the sovereignty...
No, we can't both stand. When you say you mean me. I am having no ownership of this decision.
Right? Fair enough. Fair enough. Can we please, if we respect the sovereignty of Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands on the basis it's what the people want, can we have a referendum of all of the eligible Chagosians and let them decide what the future sovereignty of the Chagos Islands is? That surely is the only fair solution.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear that these were negotiations between the United Kingdom and Mauritius, and I've set out in the past the reasons for that. The interests of the Chagosians are absolutely at the heart of this agreement. As I said, I've repeatedly engaged with them. And I do find, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman continues to speculate. With the greatest respect, he does not know the detail of what is agreed. He doesn't know the detail that has been shared. He doesn't know, Mr. Speaker, the detail that the national security apparatus of the United States has considered, and I am confident, Mr. Speaker, that he would have his concerns allayed when he sees the detail of this deal.
Dr. Andrew Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a Merry Christmas to you. The Minister says that views across the Chagosian community is mixed. In my experience, Mr. Speaker, when politicians say that, they're simply choosing the views they want to hear. Will the Minister therefore take the opportunity that has been given by the incoming Mauritian government to take a breathing space in which he can consult formally and in a structured way with Chagosians to find out what they want?
Mr. Speaker, I've engaged with Chagosian communities twice in recent months, as is made clear in answers to a number of parliamentary questions tabled by colleagues of his. Their interests will continue to be at the heart of this agreement. I take their concerns very seriously. I'm being quite honest, Mr. Speaker, that there are a range of views. There are some who oppose the deal, and there are some who are in favour of it. That's completely natural in a democratic process.
Let's go to a long-term campaigner. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, having been a member of the Chagos Islands Group ever since it was founded and had a lot of interaction with Chagosians over the last 25 years, I can assure him that I've met many Chagosians in this country and in Mauritius. They were abominably treated and shortchanged by the deal of 1968 and then later removed from the islands. Their one unifying cause is the right of return and settlement. And in that, I hope that the Minister will confirm there will be a right of return and settlement, and I understand all the negotiations surrounding the base. There is no reason why that should not include also a right of at least visiting, if not residing, on Diego Garcia itself. The ICJ judgment was very, very clear that the decolonisation process was not properly carried out by Britain in the 1960s when Mauritius achieved its independence, and that has to be righted. That has been voted on by the ICJ, voted on by the General Assembly, endorsed by the Security Council. Is there any more evidence that's necessary to indicate that it is clearly part of Mauritius, and the Chagosians obviously have rights within Mauritius as well as on the Chagos Islands when hopefully they'll be able to return?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with this characterisation of what happened to Chagosians in the past. A deep It's a matter of deep regret for this government, and indeed I think that regret is shared across the House. As I said, we will have the interests of Chagossians at the heart of this agreement. He is right to characterise the range of views amongst Chagossian communities in response to the question that I just had, and I can confirm to him that the programme of visits will include the ability to visit all of the islands, including Diego Garcia, with the appropriate safeguards in place, and I hope resettlement of the outer islands. That's certainly provision there for that to happen, and I think this is one of the most likely scenarios in which Chagossians can finally return to those outer islands.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is trying to say that nothing has changed over this deal. Yet the media reports suggest that the new Prime Minister from Mauritius says the deal's not good enough. And indeed, the Minister is now saying it's the same deal. So clearly there is something that is not being told to this House. Either the amount of money we're paying for the rental of the space is going to have to increase, or alternatively, some terms and conditions have changed. So, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for ensuring that this House can scrutinise this position. The Minister should have given a statement to that effect rather than having to have a UQ. But could we therefore pause this role, allow the Chagossians to have their say, look at what the American government coming in has to say, and then, before we proceed to this giveaway, make sure that everyone is in agreement?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Mauritius has made very clear in his exchange of letters with the Prime Minister of this country, and also indeed in his own statement yesterday, that they are willing to conclude an agreement with us. That's very, very clear. So on the fundamentals, nothing has changed. We're engaged in conversation. It's only natural after an election that they would want to do that and be able to scrutinise the agreement. That's entirely proper. That's why officials have been having those conversations. But I'm not, Mr. Speaker, going to give a running commentary on private discussions.
Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know the Minister will want to give the House the greatest possible clarity on what has brought us to this point. The Foreign Secretary has been clear that one of the central considerations for the government was the likelihood, if not the inevitability, of a binding legal judgment against the UK in this matter. The Minister will know that the judgments of the International Court of Justice are not binding on the United Kingdom when disputes between the UK and another state which are or were a member of the Commonwealth. That would include Mauritius. I don't expect the Minister to disclose the legal advice the government has received, but will he please give the House some more clarity about the nature of the legal jeopardy that the government perceives here?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not, for that very reason, going to go into that type of advice. He knows from his extensive and distinguished experience on these matters. But I do have to ask a fundamental question, Mr. Speaker. If there wasn't a problem, why did his government start negotiations on this?
Jane Curland.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I think we can forgive our overseas territories for being a little bit concerned about this government's commitment to their right to self-determination, because those of us like me who are a little bit older and have long memories will very well remember when the Labour government last time round opened negotiations with the Spanish government over the future of Gibraltar. But what I'm more interested in about today is really reassurance from him that any decision is going to be well informed. So can he tell me which of his ministers has visited the British Indian Ocean territories?
Okay. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I do have to say, and I like the Honourable Lady, but I do find that the constant way in which the Falklands, Gibraltar and other overseas territories which are not comparable to this situation are brought up is extremely unhelpful. They are very clear to me. I have just been, Mr. Speaker, as you know, with the leaders at the Joint Ministerial Council. You graciously hosted a reception as well. We have been absolutely resolute in our commitments to the Falklands and Gibraltar. I've been there and said it to myself directly on the rock. The Minister for the Armed Forces has just been down in the Falklands saying exactly the same as the Falkland Islanders. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, they are getting fed up with the nonsense that we're hearing, I'm afraid, about this. It's hugely problematic for their interests going forward. So I want to make that absolutely clear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I refer to my entry in the Register of Members' interest? Surely the Minister must accept, though, that the timing of this announcement was one of the biggest diplomatic gaffes of modern times, because it came literally hours before a general election was called. There was a widespread perception in Mauritius that this government was trying to give a leg up to a very, very unpopular sitting government who subsequently scored 0 out of 60 directly elected seats in the Mauritian Parliament. And doesn't he agree that it is wholly appropriate that the new Labour Mauritian government would be wary of the intentions of his government?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I simply don't recognise the characterisation he's made.
Adley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister update the House on the measures being taken to safeguard against the emergence of Chinese military and surveillance capabilities in British Indian Ocean territory?
Mr. Speaker, I've been very, very clear. There are provisions in the agreement to ensure the security of the outer islands. This deal would not have been agreed by across the United States security apparatus, or indeed by us, were it to give that kind of benefit to another country. So I've been very clear about Mauritius's position in relation to China, and there are provisions and safeguards in place that should allay any fears on that matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister didn't seem to answer the questions raised by the Shadow Foreign Secretary. So could I ask just one more time, from which budget does the government plan to make the annual payments that he is proposing to the Mauritian government?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've been very, very clear. It is not normal practice. I mean, Mr. Speaker, they can guffaw all they like. I'm going to give the answers that relate to the facts here and that relate to the national security and interests of this country. They spent 11 rounds of negotiations, failed to achieve a deal. We achieved that deal. We will provide the further details in due course.
Dr. Neil-Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yet again, this new Labour government rushed into an ill-judged and regrettable policy decision to cede the British Indian Ocean territory to Mauritius, against expert advice and with no regard to the wishes of the Chagossians in this country and elsewhere. Like their awful policies on scrapping the winter fuel payment for pensioners, the heartless family farm tax and their jobs tax, will the government now show some leadership, admit that they have got this wrong, scrap this deal and keep this vital territory under British control to protect UK interests, the marine environment and ultimately global security in an increasingly unstable and dangerous world?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I might gently suggest to the honourable gentleman that he spends a bit more time reflecting on the failures of his administration on this matter, and indeed on a whole series of other issues ranging from the national public finances and our national security. This government is clearing up the mess not only on this issue but on so many other issues that his government and his party left behind.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? However, I am, along with others, a consignatory to the British Indian Overseas Territories Bill calling for descendants born to individuals within the British Indian Ocean Territories to register as BIOT. There's even some I believe there's an even more imperative because of the Chagos decision, which is made with no input from local people. So my question to the Minister is this: what discussions will take place with those who consider themselves British? It would seem that the Chagossians are not assured, so what will be done to ensure that they have all necessary information in a timely manner and not to get their answers to the questions that they have through news media outlets?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said a number of times, in deep respect for the honourable gentleman, the government's been clear, deeply regrets the way that Chagossians were removed from the islands and the way they were treated thereafter. We've always been clear on respecting the interests of Chagossian communities. As I said, I've engaged and will continue to engage with Chagossian communities. Their interests at the heart of this deal, and whether it's the trust fund, whether it's the ability to resettle, the ability to visit the islands, and indeed a whole series of other measures which we've taken here in the United Kingdom, I'm confident that their interests are being respected.
Right, that completes the urgent question.